I'm here with Sheldon Bull, distinguished television writer and producer. He's worked on hit shows, Newhart, MASH, Coach, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, and he's currently a producer on Mom, which is another hit show on CBS, doing real well.
Doing real well.
Yeah. Sheldon's also been as an author. He's the author of Elephant Bucks, which is about the inside guide to writing TV sitcoms.
Right.
And has taught, giving workshops in the US and Canada, and taught at the UCLA on the writers program at UNLV. So he's really explored every aspect of TV half-hour writing. Welcome back.
Spread my ignorance everywhere.
Yeah. Well, welcome back, Sheldon.
Thank you.
Well, tell me about the book and how what's the genesis of the book?
The book came about because of another book called Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. And Blake was a dear friend of mine and a collaborator of mine. And he wrote Save the Cat, which I think is the Rosetta Stone of screenplay writing.
Right.
And I was just blown away because Blake and I had many lunches, and he'd sort of told me everything that was in the book. I kept saying to him, "Why don't you put this in a book?" He said, "Well, I'm actually doing that." So when that book came out, then he said, "I want you to write a book about half hour," and my publisher wants to publish it. So that's where the book came from. I wrote it for Blake, who's not with us anymore.
I know.
But I think of you every day.
Yeah. Well, and this was the first, you'd written a novel or two, I think.
I wrote a terrible novel a long time ago that was deservedly unpublished.
I actually read it and thought it was really interesting and insightful and truthful and all that. But half hour is your country.
Yeah.
But approaching the book, I mean, what did you think about as you wrote this, and what was your goal?
I was just trying to demystify it for people because when I learned how to write half hour, I had professional writers there, teaching me how to do it. I had to wing it before I got my first job, but then once I got in there, I learned how much I hadn't learned. But I wanted to just try to demystify the process because so many people had said to me, I can't figure out how to do this. So I just wanted to go step by step, as Blake had done in Save the Cat, and just break it all down so it wasn't so mysterious.
Yeah, I mean, it's, the joke is, the bottom line, people will say, well, you mean the actors don't just make up these lines? But beyond that, you can glean a certain amount from writing, watching and studying film and television, and figuring out what's going on and try to get the strings. But there are other ways when you really work inside the business where you learn techniques and crafts and secrets in a sense, which they are, because it's a mysterious process, particularly writing comedy, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, I mean, all writing is mysterious, and we all don't know where it comes from, and so we're all insecure and frightened all the time for fear that it's going to go away. I learned over the years that there really was a structure to these half-hour episodes that sometimes maybe seem like they don't have a structure, but do, and that the role that character plays in storytelling and all that, it really is just all about the fundamentals of storytelling. It's a lot of stuff that's in Joseph Campbell's work. It's a lot of stuff that you can find from Strunk and White, and a lot of other places.
Right.
But I just tried to condense what I knew about writing half-hour into the book.
Well, let's talk about character a little bit, and specifically in the half-hour context. There's two ways that writers approach character. One is that they are writing an original pilot, and they're thinking of character. And the other is where their characters are already existing and they're coming onto a show. Talk a little bit about the different approaches. If you're thinking up a character for an original piece, or you're coming in on a show where there's characters already established.
Much harder to come up with them from zero.
Is it?
And that's why I feel bad for young writers right now who are required to write these spec pilots, because that's so hard. I didn't write my first pilot until I'd been working in the business for years, and I had a lot of experience. And now, we're asking them to do it before they. It's very hard to develop a good character for a half hour, because you've got to make them interesting enough that you can find stories in them for 100 episodes.
Right.
So they've got to be very complex. And at the same time, they've got to be relatable. They've got to feel like somebody that you know or have met. And so it's hard to do, and very often we aren't successful, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's something that people don't understand about television, but particularly half hour, is that you're thinking of a long journey.
Yes.
Of hopefully dozens and dozens of episodes.
Yes.
And whether the character can sustain.
Yes.
And the interaction with the characters, and also my view of writing, and I know you probably agree, is that the character is story.
Yes.
And if you establish characters that are vital,
yes,
and living,
yes,
that story will develop from that.
Yes.
But the secret is to find those characters.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And then finding the right actors to play them, because the wonderful thing that actors do is they bring more dimension to it, you know, and suddenly, you know, you see things that an actor that you're working with can do that makes you think of a story.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are thinking in terms of one story being told over 100 chapters, the way Dickens used to write, you know, and that's the way I've always looked at it. You really are telling one story. Now, you may not realize in the process from week to week how that story is unfolding in the long term, but that really is what you're doing, it seems to me,
Yeah.
is telling one long, you know, 50-hour story in 100 episodes, or a 100-hour story in 200 episodes.
Yeah, and it's funny because this is going to sound ironic, but I think you probably agree, is that comedy's not ultimately about jokes or humor. It's ultimately about character. If you look at American half-hour comedy,
Yeah.
You know, the best ones aren't jokey.
No.
They're actually characters.
Yes.
Yeah.
I always tell students that jokes are the last thing to worry about.
Yeah.
First thing to be concerned with is character. And again, if you're coming on to a series that's already established, as I did when I came on Mom midway through the first season, those characters were already there. Now they were growing and they were developing, because it was only season 1, and we're still developing those characters. But it was so much easier for me to come in with characters that the other writers could already inform me about, and then I could watch episodes and see. Starting from zero is huge. I've been involved in the creation of shows, not as the creator, but there from day one on Newhart, and there from day one on Coach.
Right.
And I saw how Barry Camp developed those characters for both series, and I worked with him to develop those characters. And that's a lot of work, but you know, the key is starting with somebody, one person who's just really fascinating. You know, Hayden Fox on Coach was a very complicated guy.
Yeah.
You know, and Bob Newhart had a character already that he had been developing for years that we just, you know, built on.
Although I would think that it would be difficult for some writers, it's a very unique skill to be able to find that voice of the character.
It doesn't suit some writers.
Yeah.
I've worked with very talented writers in half hour for whom this format just did not work.
Yeah.
They really need to come up with their own stuff, and so they're better off writing a play, writing a movie script, you know, writing a novel. Then this is a very particular kind of work, and you have to be suited toward it. I always wanted to do it, but it isn't right for everybody.
Yeah, and also the collaborative aspect of it too.
Yeah, you have to be very willing to work with other writers, you know, in a room physically, you know, pitching an episode out. The way we do it on Mom, we gang write every show. Nobody goes in their office and sits in front of a computer and writes a scene. That never happens on our show.
Yeah.
We sit in a room together. Sometimes it's all of us, and sometimes we're in 2 rooms. And we pitch the whole episode out together with Chuck's guidance, and hopefully with him in the room.
Well, and it's just not just the story beats, but also dialogue, lines.
Everything.
Everything.
Everything,
The show.
yes. Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The first thing we will do is we get a story area that, and then if we've come up with it when Chuck wasn't around, because he had 3 other shows that he's producing, so we don't have him all the time.
Right.
When he came back, we would pitch an idea to him. Maybe he likes it, maybe he doesn't. If he does, he builds on it. He has his own thoughts. He almost always makes it a lot better than what we have. Then we put it up on the board. Outline it on the whiteboard,
Right.
and then we start writing.
So let's just go through the timeline on that a little, because I think it'd be interesting for folks. So let's work back from the taping to the first idea of the show, you know,
Yeah.
the concept.
Yeah.
Time-wise, what does that look like?
It
I know
can
it's-
be several weeks, particularly if it's early in the season, and it can be several days if it's late in the season. You know?
Do the showrunner have a map kind of episodes all through, way out, or is it usually
Some
only-
do.
Yeah.
On our show, Chuck really kind of likes to work from week to week.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things he says very often is what happens next. And he doesn't like to work much beyond what happens next.
Yeah.
So let's finish this week's episode before we get too hung up on what next week's episode
Which is a really smart thing, and it's actually an old theater tradition of moment to moment,
Yeah.
which you really want to keep the spontaneity going.
Yeah, exactly.
So you have a concept for the story, and you beat out some of the story beats.
Yeah.
And then you're 2 weeks or so from when you do a read. Is that?
Yeah, probably. We, you know, if we got lucky in 2 or 3 days, we could get a story into shape and get it up on the board where we have all the scenes laid out. Again, he's in and out, and sometimes he's in the room with us doing the whole thing if he has time.
Right.
And then once he's satisfied with what we've got, then he says, well, let's start writing.
Right.
And so maybe he'll be in the room with us and we'll write with him, or maybe he'll say, hey, why don't the 4 of you go off and start writing the script and the rest of you work on the next story.
Right, right.
And then we sit in a room and we really are pitching the lines out just orally.
Yeah.
And sometimes we can, I mean, Chuck is so fast.
Yeah.
He can write an act in a day, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
sometimes even less than that. The rest of us take a little longer.
Yeah.
But
Well, tell us about that, just before we leave the act idea, the act structure of a half hour.
Well, most half hours are a 2-act format because of the commercial. You know,
Right.
there's a commercial that comes in the middle. So you have the first half of the show, and you usually, at the end of the first half of the show, the first act, the characters are in some sort of jeopardy, or the stakes have been raised in some way.
Right.
And then in the second act, you resolve the problem that you've
Right.
created in Act 1.
And you may have 2 or 3 storylines going on at once.
You might,
Yeah.
yeah, because you're trying to service all the characters, so you might have a B story, a C story for some of the other
Right.
characters. Yeah.
So you pound out the script, and this
Yeah.
is a 2, 3, 4 day process, depending.
Yeah.
And so when do you do the reading? Mondays?
Monday, yeah.
So that's a whole new thing because the actors are in.
Yeah, now all of a sudden Monday, you know, the actors all come in, we sit around a table at 10:30 in the morning, and they've gotten the script over the weekend, so
Yeah.
they've had a chance to familiarize themselves
Yeah.
with it, and then they read it out loud, and we listen. And
Yeah.
we listen for the jokes that work and the jokes that don't, and
Yeah.
whether the thing is flowing the way it should, and
Yeah.
of course then we get a timing that gives us a general idea of whether
Yeah.
we're long or short,
Yeah.
and then we go back to the office and we start rewriting.
Let me ask you a question, which is maybe super inside baseball, but I know in the theater, typically actors are pretty flat on their first read, purposely.
Yes,
You know,
yes,
they're not
exactly.
making decisions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is that true in TV, or do they already know their characters enough so that they can really begin to perform?
Yeah, you really get quite, again, it varies from cast to cast, but in most of the shows I've worked on, you get pretty close to performance at the table.
Very helpful.
Because these people are such pros, and
Yeah.
they do know the character. I mean, yeah, in the pilot, it's probably going to be pretty rocky at the table reading.
Yeah, yeah.
But once you've done a few episodes, then you really do have a pretty good idea, just from the reading, of how it's going to sound on Friday night.
Which is a huge help as you're
Huge
on your
help.
rewrites. I would
Absolutely,
think.
yeah.
So talk about the rewrite process where you've got a script that's working 75%, let's say.
Well,
is that
then,
what
yeah,
you usually get? You
yeah.
usually come in about that?
Yeah, I would say that's a good number. You
Yeah.
know, that's a good reading, and
Yeah.
and that doesn't mean that you've got necessarily a scene that's a disaster, but you might. But usually, it just means that there are a few dead spots in there. There's places that just need a little help, or maybe we haven't mined all of the drama out of a scene. You know, we could get in a little more emotion out of that scene if we rewrote it. You know, but it just helps so much to hear it. And then once you've heard it, then yeah, you go back to the office and we start rewriting. We do a rewrite on Monday. The actors get that at the end of the day. They come in on Tuesday and rehearse. We go over around lunchtime on Tuesday and see them do a run through. So that
On set.
On the set. So they've gotten the show up on its feet. That's been the director's job from the time the reading ends on Monday until the run through on Tuesday, is to get the show up on its feet, which is a huge job,
Yeah.
especially sitcoms now tend to have 12, 13, 14 scenes in them. In the old days, they used to have 6.
Sure.
So that's a lot of blocking.
Is the director, does he sit on the writers' meetings at all?
Some directors do, but on our show, they don't. The director has so much to do on the stage that they don't usually sit in on the rewrites.
So you're rehearsing, and so the writer's role then, starting at around Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, is changing, right?
Well, hopefully it's diminishing then.
Yeah.
You know, yes, we see a run through on Tuesday. We see a run through on Wednesday. Then Thursday we start shooting. We pre-shoot half the show, block and tape, on Thursday, and that takes up the whole day. And we're there, and so that if a joke needs punching up, we can do that. And then on Friday, they'll rehearse during the day. We'll see a camera run through in the late afternoon, and then in the evening, an audience comes in, and then the other half of the show that we haven't shot is performed for the audience. And the reason we do it that way is, A, there are so many scenes that we just can't do it all in front of the audience. And also nowadays, you do a lot of stuff, you do green screen stuff, you go outdoors, you know, you do a lot of stuff that isn't just, you know, the living room set in the kitchen and the office.
Yep.
So we have to do that without the audience on Thursday.
And the writers may be working on other episodes as that week's going on too.
We are absolutely working
it's a
on
busy
next
job.
week's show and the week after that and the week after that,
Well, I'm going to jump a little bit because I want to get in here talking a little bit about a little prognostication about television, because it's such a changing landscape, and through your career you've seen enormous changes.
I have,
in every way, creatively, I mean financially, I'm sure, in all sorts of ways. So now we have a universe, just to lay it out, we have a universe that's really diverse.
Right.
It's broadcast television, it's cable, it's pay TV, it's mobile streaming, it's Netflix, it's all kinds of things.
Yeah, it's shows on your phone.
Exactly, exactly. And there was a point where half hour was supposed to be dead, which was not too long ago, right?
It has been pronounced dead, I would say, at least 4 times in the course of my career.
But it is also true that the audiences that you're playing to in broadcast for half hour are less than they used to be, smaller. So what's your feeling? What's the sense in the business about where broadcast TV is going, where half hour is going?
Well, where I'm optimistic is that I do believe that people still love a TV series. They love to get hooked on characters. Whether it's House of Cards that is being streamed on Netflix and they release an entire season all in one day, and you can binge watch it if you want to, sit there for 12 hours and watch the whole thing, or you can space it out. Or whether it's a show that's on Tuesday night at 8:30. I still think audiences love a series. They love getting involved in the characters, feeling like those characters are part of their lives. So I don't think that series are going to go away. It's just that they may be presented differently. They are being presented differently. And I would expect this to continue, because the idea of when I was younger, of Tuesday night at 8:30, and if you miss it, you missed it. Well, that's over. And people make their own schedules now, and that's great. It's just a different way of presenting.
Well, I also think that when people talk about content, and content is just going to be forever and universal. People want to laugh, they want to be entertained. They want to engage with characters. I suppose that in terms of humor and comedy, there are waves. I mean, it changes through generations and things like that. What about that aspect of it? I mean, I know that in your career, people have embraced more controversial subjects in half hour, and it's been progressive in that way.
Yeah, I mean, you can have a show like All in the Family, which was so groundbreaking back in the 60s, that talking about politics and religion and all these taboo subjects that nobody had ever seen on TV before, and the nation was shocked and also riveted by that. But then you can follow a show like All in the Family with a show like Everybody Loves Raymond, which was as traditional. You know, Everybody Loves Raymond could have been on in the 50s.
Yeah.
And there it was on in the 80s and the 90s, you know.
Absolutely.
So I think it all has to do with the zeitgeist. And nobody really is ever entirely sure what the zeitgeist is. But if you are, you know, concerned about it, just watch what's on. That's what the zeitgeist is.
Yeah,
You know, right now there's a lot of cynicism in 1 hour. A lot of shows with a lot of very dark, evil characters. A show like House of Cards or even Game of Thrones, you know, or Scandal or any of these shows. There's a lot of darkness in 1 hour.
Right.
And in comedy, there's, you know, again, a show like The Big Bang Theory, very traditional, wonderful characters, wonderful. It's my favorite show.
Yeah.
You know, but there's also stuff like Mom, which is trying to be a little more edgy.
Well, it is interesting when you mention Big Bang because that's a show about a bunch of Caltechy nerds.
Yeah.
Is the last thing you'd think you'd see on Half Hour.
I know.
Now, to call it traditional, you're absolutely right. It's Friends,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
But the arena is different and very interesting.
Yeah,
And therefore
yeah.
the humor is different, the characters are different.
Wonderful
so,
characters,
yeah,
and that's the key.
I do
you know,
love that.
it's Chuck and Bill Prady coming up with these, you know, it started out with 5 wonderful characters, and now it's 8 or 9 wonderful characters, and it's those 2 guys.
Not,
you know,
not something you can go and pitch as a newbie, but
no,
maybe now you can.
Well, maybe now because you could say it's just like Big Bang,
Yeah.
but when Chuck and Bill started that show, they were doing something very different.
Yeah.
You know, they had the success of 2.5 Men for Chuck to build on.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, talking about newbies,
Yeah.
You're a writer and producer who's probably a little bit over 40 at this point.
Just had my 63rd birthday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here you are working in half-hour television
can't
as a
believe
writer and
I'm still
producer.
working,
Yeah.
And I had a lot of years there where I didn't work.
Well, I know, and that was another thing. I think that you it was a great Hollywood story in a sense. I mean, you were very active and you were writing all the way through, and you continued to write even when you weren't on a show.
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
also
I was
great.
writing plays.
You were writing and teaching, and you know your experience. But I guess the point I'm saying is that there's really no limit if you have the chops and the talent and the perseverance to do this. There are still possibilities in television.
Yes, I would say to somebody who's in their 40s or 50s and wants to begin a career as a television writer, it's going to be a lot tougher for you than it is somebody 25.
Particularly half hour.
And maybe impossible,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
But I'm very lucky that, you know, they wanted me on this show and they've kept me there, and I couldn't be happier to be there.
Well, and I imagine you have a very unique role on the show too, I would say.
I hope so. You know, I think I'm very dispensable, but they keep asking me back,
That's
and
just
I
you,
willingly
Sheldon.
go.
That's
that's
you,
just me being
Sheldon.
neurotic, I know.
Well, let's talk about your playwriting a little bit, because I know you've written a couple plays, but you have one opening in New York on June 1st.
I know.
Now,
and how did that happen?
You know,
It's just
your
crazy.
stars have really.
It was a crazy fall, 2013, to have this play get picked up, and then to get this call from my dear friend Nick Bakay to say, come in to Mom and help us out with this show.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Abingdon Theater in New York read one of my plays, and they liked it, and they gave it a reading at Christmas time in 2013, and that went well, and now they're manning a full production. A small theater, you know, 60 seats, but it's still New York.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we're very excited.
Tell us a little bit about the play.
It's very loosely based on a friend of mine who got very depressed about his life. All of his friends were married and he was single, and he got very depressed, and so he went off to an island and then had some misadventures there. So it really is a play about 5 men who don't realize how close they are.
Yeah.
And that's what the play is.
Yeah, the
It's a
title of the
comedy.
play is Majorca.
Majorca, and
which is
they
that
end
island.
up going from New York to Majorca to rescue their friend, and then they all kind of get to know each other better than they thought they ever would.
Yeah. Well, I think the moral of the story there too is that as a writer, you just keep writing.
Yes.
And you're on a hit show, great.
Yeah. You're
not on a hit show, great. You write plays,
That's
you
right.
write novels, you write books.
One of the things
you
that
just write.
One of the things I loved about writing and why it was so great to make that transition from acting was with acting you need other actors,
Yeah.
you need a stage, and you need an audience. Writing, all you need is a piece of paper and a pencil. Now a computer, but in those days, a piece of paper
Yeah.
and a pencil. That's a minimum amount of tools, and I liked that. I liked the autonomy of that, and I still do.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is we were talking about character, and one of the things as a writer, ongoing is you're minding your life, you're minding your childhood,
Yes.
and all your experiences to discover characters and create them. I think the great thing about being a writer is that we have, and probably the reason we do it, is because we have some control over our lives in this little arena.
It's a wonderful illusion of control for a few minutes.
Yeah.
Because life is not about that. And but to have these characters that you can manipulate and have their life turn out the way you want it
That's
to,
right.
even if it's worse, it's a lot of fun.
It's very helpful if you've had a dysfunctional childhood where you had virtually no control over your destiny.
Oh, I would say it's required. I don't think people from happy homes become artists.
Particularly not comedy writers.
No. Oh, no. Misery loves comedy, as my friend Kevin Pollak likes to say.
Yeah, how do you, give me the armchair psychology on that one, because it seems to be very true, particularly with people who act in comedy, but also comedy writers.
Everybody says this, you know, from
what is
Mel
the deal?
Brooks to Woody Allen to everybody. You know, comedy comes from pain, and it really does. You know, I mean, life is pain, and we react to it in different ways. But some of us, for reasons unknown, react to it by making fun of it. And it's a coping skill, you know, and laughing at it, laughing at ourselves, laughing at others. And I think that's where comedy comes from.
Well, I think if you're also an intelligent person, it gives you a little bit of distance from all the crap that you might be experiencing and looking at, and you can kind of, it's in psychology what they call the observing ego.
Yes.
And I think that you can exercise that in humor.
Absolutely.
Probably better than in any other way. And the other thing that's sort of unfortunate is in the theater too, comedy's underrated always.
Oh, always.
Which is
the awards
which
all
is a
go to
drag.
drama. Yeah, all the rewards go
Yeah.
to drama. They get the characters crying and rending their garments.
Exactly.
You know, and then you'll
Doesn't that
you'll
piss
get an
you
award.
off? It bothers me.
It used to bother me. Now I just accept it. You know,
That's
I'm so
great.
glad to still be working. I don't care anymore.
Sheldon Bull, congratulations on all your
Thank you.
success.
This was big fun.
It was.